when these various women of polygamous relationships enter into the timeline.
Well, other than just being a polygamist or polyamory, or well, I guess you can't call it polyamory because Joe wouldn't let Emma do the same thing.
But
back in the day.
I should stop you because there is evidence that there was a bit of open sexuality going on. So polyamory is actually a pretty good term for what was going on in Nauvoo. Polygyny, the male-centric patriarchal polygyny, that was much more common in later Nauvoo years, and then moving out to Salt Lake City. But all in all, I think a lot of the Mormons were fairly open sexually. That goes across genders, that goes across everything. They were a little bit more open than we are today.
Yeah, and what I was going to mention was, back in the day, 14 years old, well, I was still young, wasn't really completely out of the question,
Yeah.
Kids were expected to grow up a lot faster back then.
Well, that was actually, I believe it was the age of 16 was made legal with parental consent, or maybe it was 14. 14 was legal for marriage at the time with parental consent. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't out of the ordinary, because the average marriage age at the time was 22 for women and 21 for men. 21 for women, 20 for men. So, even a 14-year-old getting married back at that time, that was still kind of out of the ordinary. It was still kind of weird.
I wanted to reverse back to something you were talking about whenever Joe got tarred and feathered and got the hell beat out of him. Right. What's the name of that horrible movie that you said I shouldn't watch that I watched?
The Prophet of the Restoration, I think, right? Did you watch it?
Yes. Yeah, I did.
Why?
That was an hour of my life that I will never get back again. But I bring that up. I think it's around minute 23 or so. If you want to see what Bryce was talking about through Mormon-colored glasses, you can see what happened, and Joe's made out to be the martyr in the entire thing, but it's a horrible movie.
Oh, it is. But that does speak to something that I think Joe was really good at, because he was able to thrive off of this persecution, right? When he would do something that would cause him to get beat up, whether that was fooling around with a 16-year-old, or whether that was trying to get another man's wife, or whether it was just preaching his gospel, because let's face it, a lot of Mormon persecution was because of their theological convictions. People thought they were Satanists and that they were preaching from the devil and stuff like that. And that was at the head of a lot of their persecution. Don't get me wrong. But there was also a lot of other factors with it. But what Joe was able to do was thrive off of it. And it endlessly amazes me to see what happened after that beating in Hiram, Ohio that they depict. It happened on like a Friday night, and the next Sunday he got up on stage and gave a sermon covered in tar, bloody and bruised from getting beat up, and he stood up there and said, this is what they've done to me. This is the persecution that they've leveled against your prophet. And he was able to take that unpleasant evening and turn it into a congregation full of lifetime converts, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So he apparently had a real good sense of the dramatic, I guess.
Oh yeah. And that's the thing. I have a hard time nailing down Joseph Smith and his personality very well. I think narcissism was definitely at the center of it, but I also kind of see him as more of the party boy guy, the more of the melodrama type dude. Where I see Sidney Rigdon was more of the bookworm guy that kind of got the Book of Mormon rolling. That's a whole hour's worth of scholarship to try and dive into to explain the possibility of that being the case. But I think Joseph Smith was more of he was kind of the I don't really care type of dude. He'd like to party. He liked to get lots of women. He liked to, not be responsible for things. And, that's just, I think that kind of plays out in what, in the theatrics that he did, similar to getting up when he was covered in tar and blood and whatnot. So
sometimes there's a man. I won't say hero. Well, I won't say man either. More like a sarcastic 2-inch tall Lego minifigure bent on world domination. I'm talking about Lego Darwin.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this totally groovy day.
Deadhead Animation presents the internet's #1 most trusted anthropomorphic plastic toy.
I mean, some guy wrote that in a forum on the internet, so it must be true, right?
Lego Darwin as Lego Darwin in Lego Darwin.
They care nothing about the dangerous health effects on people living near these towers of doom.
Bringing you everything you need to know about the news, politics, and the world today, all while sporting one of the damn finest beards I've ever seen.
All I have to do is plug in this cable and we can send Marty back to the future.
Oh. Deadhead Animation presents Lego Darwin. New episodes every week right here on Deadhead Animation. Taking the piss out of everything.
You know, one of the things that I guess I should have done first was, can you give us maybe a 5-10 minute rundown, and I'll interject where I can, about Joe's early life and just exactly how he came about, to write I know you mentioned the rock and the hat and all that kind of stuff. Like I said, can you give us like a 5-minute rundown, 10-minute rundown of Joe and, where he came from, his background, how he wrote the Book of Mormon and all that?
Yeah, that's, please feel free to stop me if I get too detailed, because it'll turn into an episode of my show, and I don't want to do that to you. But,
no, that's perfectly fine. That's what I want.
All right, fair enough. Now you're getting a full double barrel then. So in 1805, December 23rd, 1805, Joseph was born in Vermont. He grew up there for a few years, and something that's very important in Mormon history that they often talk about was when he was 7 years old or 8 years old, he got an infection in his leg, and the doctors tried a new experimental treatment on him where they cut open his leg and they scraped the infected portion of the bone away from the good part of his bone. So from that time on, Joseph had a limp. For the rest of his life, he'd have a limp from this childhood operation. And Mormons tout this story as so amazing that he was, he refused to take alcohol as a sedative because he was, he thought that alcohol was bad for people, and, that was kind of a precursor to the word of wisdom where Mormons don't drink alcohol. Well, that's not the case. It was a matter of Joseph Smith Sr., Joseph's dad, was an alcoholic. And Joseph didn't like what Dad acted like when he was on wine, when he had a lot of wine to drink. So Joseph didn't do it as a little 7-year-old kid. So it's not so much. I was about to say, not to mention that he's also 7, and I don't even think back then you were supposed to give kids alcohol that young. Well, they would still do it for like medical procedures, especially if it was. With this leg procedure, it was either this or amputate his leg completely. So for a situation like this, it wasn't unheard of whatsoever. Back in this day, people would give kids a little bit of rum to put them to sleep, to make them, make their bellies warm to go to sleep. It wasn't terribly uncommon, but it was still a matter of how the story is portrayed and how it's viewed through the Mormon rose-colored glasses, as you so aptly put it. Joseph didn't refuse it because he didn't think alcohol was good for you. He refused it because he was abused as a child because Daddy was a drunk. That's not a very beautiful story. In fact, it's kind of twisted. So Joseph grows up in this resource-starved home with, just living in rags, basically, very, very, very poor, very destitute. And, this was mostly due to the fact that his father lost money in an overseas ginseng deal that ended up going awry, and then the business partner kind of took the Smiths for all they were worth, which wasn't very much, and it left them even more destitute. So once Joe turned about, I believe, 11 years old, they moved out to New York, and then they settled around the Palmyra and Manchester area. And that's where they grew up. They had 9 kids in the family. Very, very resource scarce. They were always starving, didn't have much to eat, always having to work for food constantly, or try and do other things to get food or get money, which is what Joe liked to do because he wasn't as capable of working as the other boys because he had the bum leg all the time and he just didn't like to work. So he kind of took to treasure digging instead for his money.
This is the Palmyra district is the burned over district, right?
Yeah. So the burned over district was where Joseph Smith was, kind of born. And that was centered around Rochester, and Palmyra's about 20 miles from Rochester. So it's all in this burned over district stripe of New York where they said that the religious revivals had burned out the fuel so much that there was no more fuel left to burn. That's why it was a burned over district.
Yeah,
So,
and there's plenty of other religions that started there too.
oh yeah, and plenty that came before and after Mormonism. We should make that clear. And some with very, very, very similar tale, similar prophets and similar prophetesses and, similar, religious strife. It's just their entire storylines are similar to Mormonism, just on smaller scales. So Joseph got to swindling people for money, telling him that he could find their treasure, and he did this a couple of ways. He would make a testable claim. He would cold read or something, and he would make a claim, and then the people would latch onto it in the way psychics do nowadays. Or, like we have evidence of him or Sally Chase or other treasure seekers, they would take something that somebody owned, and then they would go to that person and say, hey, did you lose something? Because I can help you find it. And then they would use their seer stone to supposedly, quote unquote, find it. I'm using finger air quotes here. And then they would return it to the person for a fee, right? So, and of course, Joseph supposedly did this with some horses. Some horses of a rancher went missing, and then Joseph came to the rancher and said, I can find those horses for you if you pay me some money. And then miraculously, he found the horses. Well, it's because Joe stole them in the first place. So
Amazing how that happens.
Right. Isn't that crazy? A bag of grain or, horses, oxen, whatever, it just, is easy to move and easy to conceal. So, Joseph Smith, it took to doing these to a lot of people, and, some people were his main victims. You had Josiah Stowell, who was, in my storyline, I call him Boss Man Joe because he was kind of the rich farmer guy that wanted to dig on his property and find, whether it was gold or oil or what, he was just trying to find something useful on his land. Well, I guess they weren't really looking for oil much back then. Anyway, Josiah Stowell hired Joseph Smith, and Joe took him to a place and said that I see a buried treasure with a feather next to it of the feather is from the spirit guardian of the treasure. So they dig down in the dead of night and they find a feather, but the treasure keeps sinking under their feet. As soon as they get close to the treasure or something, or they're digging and they feel their shovel ting against the roof of the hood of the treasure, it just sinks further into under their feet. And it's so frustrating for them. But they get so close to getting the treasure every time, but they just don't ever quite get it.
It's amazing that the guardian spirit, since that was its feather, it's amazing that the feather didn't move along with the treasure. So I guess the feather wasn't very important to the spirit guardian.
I guess not, but I mean, it's interesting that you see the same theme with the Book of Mormon. So the treasures had spirit guardians, right? One time when Joseph was looking for treasure, it was a huge treasure digging crew with Josiah Stowell, some like 12 or 18 guys, just a whole bunch of them digging up holes all over Pennsylvania and the Susquehanna area, and it's just an absolute mess. And Joseph says that the spell of the spirit guardian is too much, and I can't find it anymore. Or he would say, I see that in the past that there were two Indian spirits here that fought to the death, and one of them is buried with the treasure, and he's its guardian. And it's just very mystical and very occult and very old timey folk magic type. And it's interesting that you see the same theme with the Book of Mormon, because Joseph Smith did the same thing in finding the Book of Mormon. In his 1823 trial, in trying to dig up the Book of Mormon, he dug it up, he lifted the thing off of the stone covering off of the box that held the golden plates and the sword of Laban and the chest plate and the Urim and Thummim. He opened the box up and he took the gold plates out, and he set the gold plates on the ground behind him, and then he looked back into the box to see if there was anything else in there, which he wasn't supposed to do, and then he looked back to where he had set the plates down, and they were gone. He's like, what's going on? Then he looked back in the box, and he saw that the plates had magically teleported there, back to, from the ground next to the box, back into the box, and he's like, what's going on? So he tried to reach in and grab it, and he was shocked. and he couldn't take out the plates. And then, there's two separate accounts of this, one from Martin Harris, one from, I think, David Whitmer, that say that, the third time that Joseph tried to grab the plates out of